Hey everyone, how are you? Hopefully we are live. It looks that way. I'm still waiting for Artem. We had a quick testing before, like 20 minutes ago. We tested everything is fine with the live stream, and he had to run for a minute. So now I'm sort of waiting here for him to join me. So hopefully he'll he'll join me very soon because we're at the top of the hour and we should be starting. So just a just a second. In the meantime, you can just go ahead and say hi in the chat. Hopefully you're having a good day. Today we'll be talking about testing and talking about debugging and sort of hanging out. Talk about different stuff because Artem is very influential in the testing space. He has built some amazing tools for testers to use. So I'm just going to ping him so he can talk about it himself. Let's see. Oh, oh, here you are, man.
Oh, I don't hear you.
You don't hear me.
Not sure if it's me.
I can hear you well. I hear
No,
you.
not yet.
And you cannot hear me? Cannot even see you, to be honest.
Let me double check that it's not me. Just gonna open something. Come on.
All right, we're.
Okay, it's not me. So
It's
my
not
audio
you.
is.
Okay. That's weird. Let me check the sound.
Yeah.
Sound is always the problem.
Still can't hear you.
I cannot. Oh, I can see you now. See you now. But I can hear you. How
I can
about
see you
now?
but you can't hear me either. Interesting.
I can hear you. So
Okay, got it. For some reason, I can't hear you.
that's
Even now. Maybe it's just muted somewhere. I don't know.
I don't know. It seems
yeah, that is weird. I agree.
straight. All right, just give us a couple of seconds till we figure out.
Oh, that's awesome.
The technical technical difficulties. If you are in the chat, please confirm that you can hear Artem. That would be really great. Because according to what I see, you should be able to hear him. But I may be wrong here. We'll try to figure it out.
Yes. I feel like we have to, otherwise it will be very challenging. I can try lip reading, but I can't guarantee the reliability.
Yeah, okay, so the stream can definitely hear you. Can you check the...
That is fantastic. I'm happy that everybody can hear me. Otherwise, that's cool.
If
Oh, okay. So it did something. You're right. It did something to my settings. It set my output to my input. I didn't do that.
Okay.
That's interesting. Can you say something now?
Hey.
The connection has been established. Hello.
All right.
Awesome.
All right, we're here. Yeah, that's the problem with audio. I hear everyone complaining about printers, but honestly, audio is much worse than printers. I'm fine with my printer; it prints everything when I ask, almost. But audio is just magic.
Yeah.
All right, so welcome, Artem, officially. People could hear you already, but they've been hearing just you figuring out the problem. So I'm glad
Yes.
we are live now. So for those who don't know you, which I don't think there be too many people, at least in places where I hang out, but if you could introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself to the crowds that are watching you and maybe don't know me. I feel like that would be a bigger crowd, but we can do a poll or something.
Yeah, of course. I can go ahead. Hey, folks. My name is Artem. I'm a software engineer. I am fascinated by API design and testing, obviously, and I've joined Epic Web recently with Kenzie Dots and other amazing instructors to teach the world about automated testing.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that. By the
Thanks.
way, it's really cool to see you talking about testing and read your articles. I think that's pretty awesome. I think we're going to be mentioning them today. But those of you who don't
Awesome.
know, check out epicweb.com. Did I?
.dev.
.dev. Okay.
Yes.
And you can read Artem's blogs on testing. I think he has some really cool insights there. To give a brief introduction about me, although we're streaming mostly on the channels that I hang out on, so that's the YouTube channel, Twitter, and also on LinkedIn. I'm Philip. I do DevRel at Replay.io, which is an amazing company building an amazing product for debugging, which is also a topic we'll be discussing today. Um, all right, Artem,
Yeah.
we agreed that we're going to be talking about testing today, and I have a question for you because
Hmm.
testing is obviously so vast that when two people say I am testing, they can be talking about totally different things. You can be testing hot sauces and wine, Formula One car, or whether the airplane is ready to take off. We're obviously software developers and software testers, but even within that area, I feel like there's still a very broad range of what testing means. And for me, I'm not in testing that long. It's almost a decade, which is not that long. But I come from the world of like end-to-end testing and manual approach and doing like test automation. That's sort of black boxy, and it's more about business requirements, etc. And I found out over the years that when I talk about testing, I'm not necessarily talking about the same thing as maybe my friends that are more involved in web development. And I think that's maybe I'm guessing wrong, but I feel like this is your path and this is your background. You're coming more from like the developer perspective of things. So what does it mean for you when you say I am testing? What's the process like?
Yeah, you're right. I'm absolutely coming from the background. So everything, like I started with React apps. So my first tests were around React apps and like simple JavaScript functions as well. So to me, when I say I'm testing, well, this is really really interesting because you mentioned this example with like car manufacturing and airplane checkups, and I think testing is actually fundamentally the same even there. Like the whole point of testing is to verify that what you want behaves as you want, right? To verify this intention. So for me, when I'm testing it, it doesn't matter how I test. I'm basically checking that my code, my system, it behaves as I intended. Well, for years, I've been employing automated testing practices, which I also encourage people to do. But I've also seen and done some manual testing because it does make sense. It has its practical applications in teams. And, if you do testing, that's already a victory, basically.
Yeah, I like to say that testing is development. It's basically the different sides of the same coin.
Mm.
Because even when you are a developer and you write some code and then you run it to see what is the output of that code, you
Yeah.
didn't magically transform into tester. Although you're testing, you're verifying whether the thing you have done is
Yeah.
doing the thing that it is supposed to be doing. So testing is inherently part of development. Uh, I'd like to ask you about tools. You
Yeah.
said you have performed automated test automation, doing manual testing. What kind of tools have you been using during that journey?
So So I didn't do that much of manual testing, and for me, it actually just kind of ended with what you described, just trying out my code and my functionality, and can be locally, it can be on some staging or production environment, but it's still manual testing. And when I came to automated testing, I believe I started with Mocha, which
Mhm.
is still a fantastic framework. And then I migrated to Jest eventually. It's been an incredible like developer experience jump. Jest is incredible. It taught us so much about how we can write tests and gave us a lot of declarativity, like expect functions. I absolutely love this. And then eventually I came to VTest recently, which is very similar to Jest. It just embraces a bit more of modern practices. It comes with ESM support built in, and while it focuses around Vite, it can be run out absolutely detached from Vite. Like all my projects are running, most of them are running on VTest, but I'm not using Vite myself. So I kind of missing a little bit on this interoperability that they offer, but it's still a great experience in terms of performance, and APIs are very much inspired by Jest.
Mhm.
And when it comes to end-to-end testing, I think like I remember the day when I discovered Cypress. It was really cool. Like they had this old landing page, and my colleague pulled me by the shoulder and said like, "Hey, look, this looks amazing," and it does look amazing. And I've been using Cypress for some time. Then I migrated to Playwright eventually, mostly because I started doing a lot of in browser testing around tooling. So perhaps people know me as the author of Mock Service Worker. And it obviously runs in the browser, so I need a browser environment to test it. But Cypress didn't give me enough of like browser kind of internals. I don't know, for the lack of a better word.
Mhm.
While Playwright actually exposes me everything, I can like check service workers. I can be kind of closer to the metal, if you would. So I switched to Playwright over the years, and it's been pretty great. Um, I don't think I discovered any other tools recently. I think that's about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's interesting what you said about difference between Playwright and Cypress, because for the longest time I thought that Cypress is actually closer to browser because it executes inside the browser.
Hmm.
Whereas with Playwright, you start in the node environment and then you basically call the browser to perform some actions,
Yeah.
at least like on a higher level. That's my mental model of that. But I guess what you mean that you have access to the Chrome DevTools protocol,
Yeah.
which can execute certain actions. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I'm wondering about Jest and Vtest. These are tools I haven't really used in the past, mostly because, as I mentioned, I come more from like the end-to-end approach where I try to automate the user scenario and validate different user stories. I wonder what kind of testing do you do with these tools? I have been getting myself familiar with like component testing. Not sure if that's the same thing or it's in the similar area, but for the folks in the audience who might have a similar path to me, how would you explain that to them or to me
Yeah.
actually?
Yeah. I would explain it as a testing framework for Node.js because both of them are, at least at their core. And they allow you to do the same stuff you do in like Cypress and Playwright. It just runs in Node,
Mhm.
and you can test any JavaScript code in there as well. So, for example, I use it very often for simple unit testing of like very, very primitive classes and utility functions because they don't really rely on the browser APIs that much. I can just use the same JavaScript logic and test it in Node.js. It's, I don't know, it doesn't have that much benefit, but I have one kind of requirement towards myself. So when I should be testing code in the same environment it's supposed to run. So if I'm developing functions that will be running in Node.js, I should be testing them in Node.js. It's the same for the browser, but it kind of gains more value as we move up and we start addressing like component testing. So these tools, both VTest and Jest, they support component testing through like environments like GSDOM. So you can actually render your like React, Angular, Svelte components in Node.js through these custom environments and get some value out of those tests as well. So they will be maybe slightly faster. Who knows? They would definitely allow you to have more variability. If you want to test like 10 different behaviors of the same component, that would be a really nice way to do that. And yeah, that's just basic usage.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think that paints a picture for me. Uh, I want to switch topics now because
Yeah,
uh, many people know you as the author of Mock Service Worker. I'm imagining that this solves a problem that Jest or Vitest or whatever tool you were using before wouldn't provide you with. So in a nutshell, could you explain what is Mock Service Worker and what kind of problems it solves, and maybe also how can you use it?
for sure. So Mock Service Worker is an API mocking library. So it allows you to be in charge of the network that happens basically anywhere in your app. For example, in a test. So when you test a new component and it fires some HTTP requests, you don't really want those to happen for various reasons. They may be costly. And most of all, it kind of brings more context to your test. So I have a really nice rule that says that your test should only fail when your intention behind the code has been kind of not met. So imagine you have a component and it does an HTTP request to a server. The server may be down, and as a consequence, your test will fail, while your functionality, your front-end code can actually be 100% correct. So if that happens, that's a sign of a bad test. In this case, it's a badly orchestrated test. So it needs to draw the line of the boundary of the test, and tools like MSW and generally mocking is one of the techniques to draw that boundary to basically tell your test where your tested system ends. So that's a very brief explanation. When I created MSW, the main problem to solve was a better way to intercept requests, because what tools at the time used to do, they just patched the fetch function if we're talking about the browser, because MSW was like a browser like only originally. And I stumbled upon service workers. They provided a much cleaner and standard API to intercept requests in the browser. So I went with that idea. So you can see it in the name. And as the time went on, I saw a lot of value in being able to reuse your request handlers, your mocks. Because what ended up in my project is that I was testing like different code on different levels. So in my integration tests with Jest, for example, I would use some, for example, Jest APIs or maybe tools like Knock, which worked fantastically. And I have that test passing. Then I would move to end-to-end tests, and maybe I would want to, I don't know, check just my front end in isolation. So I would mock my third-party requests and requests to my own servers. But suddenly I need to use different tools, because obviously you cannot just grab Knock and use it in a browser. Those are for different environments. And it was a little bit disjoined. The experience suffered a lot because I felt like I was repeating myself in multiple places. Not to mention that, for example, I want to just develop against the mock. Now I need a third time to introduce the mocks. It just felt like a lot of repetition, just enough repetition to consider maybe we can do it better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we added support for Node.js and MSW, and basically covered any JavaScript, not any runtime, but two of the major runtimes. So you have it running in the browser and in Node.js using the same source of truth. So the same network description.
Can Mock Service Worker be used with end-to-end tests as well?
Yes, of course. It's just an API mocking tool. So whenever you want to control the network, you can use MSW.
All right. So let me get this straight. If I understand it correctly, so when you want to use Mock Service Worker, you basically set it up in a way you want it to behave, and then run the tests. So whenever the test is doing some kind of API request, it's going to hit the Mock Service Worker instead of the real API. So you're sort of running them in parallel, and I would imagine the integration, they're intertwined, they're integrated. They're not like two parallel commands you need to put into terminal. But as an idea, they're sort of running in parallel. So they're hitting the service worker, so that your tests are hitting the service worker instead of real server. All right. That kind of reminds me of CY intercept command in Cypress, where you would where you could also have a variety of options to take that network layer and to do something with it. Either you can just provide a static fixture or an
Yeah.
empty response or a different response code. But also what I really liked, and I showed that in an example in my YouTube channel a couple of months ago, was that you could also sort of combine stuff, which I found
Yeah.
useful for end-to-end tests. A simple example would be when you have a SaaS service and your
Mhm.
subscription is ending. Usually, your front end notifies you, right? Your subscription is ending in 10 days. And I had this exact same problem in my previous company where I would need to write the test and verify that the message actually appears and it shows the right
Yeah.
text, etc. And but I couldn't do that with real data. I couldn't create an account that's expiring. So instead, what I would do, I would open an existing account, and at some point there would be an API call for the for getting the data about that subscription, and that would contain the expiry date,
Yeah.
which would drive the showing or hiding of the message. So I would take the real response and just change that expire date to something that I wanted to less than 10 days from now. Uh, and it also allowed me to, before I mock the real response, to verify that it actually has the structure that I'm expecting, because with mocking there's a certain danger that you're sort
Yeah.
of detaching yourself from the server, and something on the server might change, which of course sometimes might break our tests in unexpected ways. But also we should be in some contact with the with the real stuff, so that we don't like get too diverted, and we're happy because tests are green here, tests are green here, but but ultimately nothing is working.
Yeah, that's for sure. This kind of modification of responses also something that we support for a long time. We just called it response batching. So you basically can, when you intercept a request, you can, in your handler, you can instruct your code to just do another fetch with the same request object, which will return you the original response, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can stream it back. You can. I have a really nice example in my Egghead course where I'm building a kind of Netflix clone, very, very, very primitive, basically
Mhm.
movie streaming app, and it's basically emulating the video stream. So you open a movie and the movie starts streaming from somewhere. And what we do there, it's completely mock first, so no servers involved. On MSW side, we create a handler for this endpoint for this movie, and we actually fetch like a dummy movie from somewhere, actual MP4 file, and then we grab the stream and we process the stream using a transform stream, which allows us to control every chunk that's being written from the original source to what the client receives. And using this, we actually insert delay between chunks, so we can test functionality like, for example, a buffering spinner. You're watching a
Oh,
show on a
nice.
slow connection. How do I write a test that when connection is slow, we're showing the spinner? Well, that's how. You fetch the real data, you transform it, adding the delay whenever you want, how long as you want, and then you get the spinner reliably because stream comes, then the chunk comes in, it delays, you see the spinner, delay
Oh,
ends,
wow.
and you see the movie. Yeah.
That's amazing, because I got asked about a similar use case quite a
Uh,
lot on my Discord server, and the answer would be not as good as this one. I definitely need to check out the course. By the way, if you have the link somewhere, feel free to send it to me now, and I'll put it into the chat
yeah, of
so that
course.
people can view that. Also for Epic Web, I mean Epic Web dev people could probably find that, but we can put it in the in the chat
I
just
will
in case.
definitely send it to you. So if you want, you can share it with folks.
All
Yeah, if
right.
you haven't watched it, give it a try. It's on Egghead, so if you have a subscription, it will be free for you. It's about 45-minute course where we build this movie streaming app from start to finish against mock APIs exclusively. I think it's really nice. It gives nice introduction to MSW. We also use both REST and GraphQL APIs there, which is neat. So you have a taste, you can get a taste how it feels like to mock those both types of APIs with a single tool.
Well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to take a look into that because just the use case with the buffering, I think that's really cool. I
Yeah,
need to play around with that. Uh, I have a question for you. Uh,
go ahead.
Because this one I have prepared and I asked it on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, and I'm interested in the answer you will give me. What takes bigger part of your day? It is writing the code or debugging it.
Hmm. Okay, if I'm to choose between these two options, uh, I think debugging takes the most time of my day, but not for the reasons you would think,
All
because
right.
I'm usually debugging the code somebody else wrote. So having to like work with even like an MSW layer, we have to account for a lot of use cases. So while we base the library on fetch API primitives and on the standards, it doesn't mean that every other third-party tooling will support those standards. Sometimes it happens they don't. Sometimes it happens there's a very deeply nested bug. It can even be a bug in Node.js. Just 2 weeks ago, I discovered a bug in Node.js. They have a message event that should be cancelable, but it's not. They ignore the cancelable property. So I spend probably like 60% of my working day debugging Node.js, not because something is wrong, don't get me wrong there, but just because I need to understand what's going on and how things operate. So I'm sure that we're intercepting requests on the right level in the right time. As a side effect, I learned Node.js, which is nice.
That's exactly what I wanted to point out is that we oftentimes think of debugging as the process of finding the root cause of a bug, which it definitely is, but it's
Yeah.
also a journey of getting a better understanding of the code you are working with. And I think that you could draw a equal sign between debugging and learning because there's
Hmm.
just like so much happening. I mean, it's oftentimes very confusing. It's oftentimes very like you want to tear your hair out sometimes. But once you find the problem, once you realize what has been wrong, you come out of it as much smarter person and know
Yeah,
a
I
lot
think
more about either code you wrote and you thought you understand but you didn't, or the code that someone else wrote, which you now understand.
this is why some companies employ this practice where they assign bugs to the newcomers, because resolving an issue will force you to understand the product, just one area of the product, but enough for you to understand the bug and solve the bug. And as this passive skill, you get the idea about the overall product. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting strategy because like from outside perspective it always looks like, oh, we're just going to give you do the dirty work no
Dirty
one
work.
wants
I
to do.
know, I know.
but but yeah, if you really think about it, it has exactly the benefit you mentioned. You get to get a better understanding, and that's the shift that I'm hoping that gets talked a little bit more about. That
Hmm.
debugging as a process is not the thing that's annoying. It's actually learning. It's actually
Hmm.
something that's going to make you a better developer, make you a better tester.
Yeah.
You'll get a better understanding, and I think that's worth pursuing. Because there's this annoying bug in the backlog no one wants to talk about, no one wants to dive in, but there's probably many learnings behind that.
Yeah.
So I think that was a great point you made there. Um, all right, so the bigger part of your day is debugging. You answered the same as I think 70% of the respondents that I that I got, and
Yeah.
it also shows like how important that topic is, and to be talking about debugging. Uh, we actually talked about this. Remember when we had a call like a month ago about
Yeah.
debugging? You mentioned that you are preparing something, that you are
Yeah.
working on a course, and there will be a topic on debugging. Would you
Yes.
like to discuss that? Because I have some things I want to show you as well, but I want you to start.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm working on this series of workshops as a part of Epic Web, and I'm definitely having the debugging workshop as a brand new material to explore all the techniques I use to debug tests. Maybe for someone, this phrase will sound weird, but no matter how you call it, when the test fails, you need to do something about it. And to me, that's debugging. I need to understand why this failure happens. Most often, it indicates bug in my code. It can indicate some shortcomings in my testing setup as well, which to me is equally a bug. So I had this really nice idea of a workshop. It's in the progress right now because I'm focusing on the fundamental part, and then we'll probably have a few different topics to start from. So it kind of has this nice progression to onboard everybody into the world of automated testing. But the debugging workshop would be absolutely something I would love to do. Like, I was crazy excited. I wrote Kent, like, hey, I got this idea yesterday in the evening. We need to do a debugging workshop because nobody's talking about this. Did you know there is a hidden type of a terminal in VS Code? And the terminal actually gives you a pre-configured debugger, so you don't have to write like launch.json. It was amazing. Actually, I believe Mateusz shared this with me,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not misattributing, but basically it was also given to me as a sacred knowledge, and I want to spread it as well for people because it's amazing in debugging tests in like Node.js. That works wonders. So yeah, I will be talking about all the techniques I know and even techniques I don't know. That's a great part of being an educator because I have to explore the problem area and I have to learn myself a lot. And yeah, hopefully one day everybody here and everywhere will see this debugging workshop and learn from it.
That's great. Can wait to see that one. Because I got into debugging a lot, and actually, if we're talking about the same Matush, uh, he's a Replay.io power user,
Oh.
and actually, I hope I'm not sharing something that prematurely, but he has joined the team at Replay.io.
What? Wow, that's huge news.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really happy for him. You are
So
lucky.
yeah, I'm amazed. He hosted. Wait, I forgot whether that was. I think that was his podcast, but he was with my colleague Mark Erickson on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about debugging, our favorite topic. So and he actually uses replay for debugging Node.js, which is
Yeah.
something we have, but it's sort of an experimental feature. I think it's I don't know if I'm correct here, but I believe it's like locked on Node.js 16 or 18. I forgot
Uh-huh.
which version it is, but uh, it has been done as an experiment, and he's sort of using that to what was it, like, debug TypeScript compiler problems, stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Some kind of crazy thing. So it's funny that you mentioned him.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so the debugging workshop, what do you think is the number one thing that people are overlooking, maybe missing when talking about debugging? Because I feel like this is something, and we talked about this, right? That, like, everyone does debugging, right? We established that it's this strange way of learning stuff. So everyone does it, right? But we don't really have a process around that, right?
Mm.
It's like when you're trying to learn something, you also need to learn how to learn, right?
Yeah,
And
that's brilliant.
with debugging, everyone sort of wings it, right? We do it
Mm.
very intuitively. But I think some patterns might be emerging as we do it as developer community or whatever. Um, have you found that to be true? Have you found some patterns that are important, or maybe speed up debugging, make it more efficient, or make it easier, or whatever?
There are definitely patterns that I use myself, like every time something happens and I need to debug it. What helps me a lot, I don't know if it's like a number one thing, but it helps me a lot is putting the same scenario in isolation. To
Mm-hmm.
me, that's always helpful. I can't recall a single issue where if I put it in isolation, it wouldn't resolve the issue. Like, it's incredibly like rewarding technique. Sometimes it's more time consuming depending on what you're trying to debug, but it can be anything from scoping the task, scoping a behavior, to actually trying to reproduce that behavior in a completely clean repo. This is something that I do shamefully as kind of a last resort, but it always helps. Just recently, I was debugging something very strange around like socket interceptors in Node.js, and it didn't make sense until I moved it into a separate repo, and now it does. Now it works. So this is something I use a lot, and I would recommend people to use. Basically, the power of isolating the behavior, isolating the bug.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. I am now in the middle of writing up a blog post. Actually,
Yeah.
let me share the screen with you. It's called Debugging Test Flakes, and
Ooh.
it's about this process of debugging, finding the problems. It's not finished. This is like you can see. This is on localhost. I haven't published it yet, but I started with first thing validation. That's and I'm citing Dr. House here. Everybody
Mhm.
lies. It's more about making sure that what I'm seeing is actually the thing I'm seeing, because it's very easy to jump into an assumption, especially when a
Mm.
bug is reported by someone, right? Nothing
Yeah.
works, right? It's all broken or whatever. Those are my favorite bug reports, right? But also, even if people are specific, they witness something, and then I made this graph of that's supposed to be like a representation of how we communicate things, or maybe even how I communicate things. So there's this pool of what I think, and then there's this sub set of what I can actually put into words, and then a subset of that is what I actually do put into words, and then there's this whole filter of language and people perceiving that, understanding what I actually mean by the words I'm using,
Yeah.
and then there's this very small part, or the smallest part is the what we actually understand the same way. So the validation I feel is like quite important. But the second point that I'm making, no, it's actually third point. As you can see, I'm just like have a bullet points here. But the third point is narrowing down,
Yeah.
making the thing isolated, making sure that once we observe something, we can actually like what's the smallest example of this not working? What is the minimal reproduction? How
Yeah.
can we make sure that what we are seeing is the actual thing? And one of the things that I also am going to mention it, which I don't hear being talked about, is like this constant validation. So there is this red herring. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that metaphor, but
I heard it, but I probably don't remember.
it's basically about, oh, I think I know what this is about, and then you go on that path and you realize, oh, I was on the wrong path uh,
Mm.
all the way, right? All that time. And I think that's also really important to be sort of aware that, all right, I decided to do a couple of steps this direction, but I still need to think about whether I'm actually walking towards my goal or walking away from it, because I may be working on a something uh, that's a red herring. That's a false clue. Something I
Mm.
need to go back to.
Yeah.
While I was while I was sort of researching and looking for different metaphors in this debugging thing, debugging area, I thought about like private investigators or detectives or whatever. Whenever they are searching for stuff, they're also like narrowing down, trying to find clues, etc.
Oh yeah.
And I think I have the link somewhere, but I wouldn't be able to find it quickly. But there was this there was this point of actually make sure that you're humble and you don't marry your ideas, right? You have a theory of what's wrong, but you need to be able to drop the theory like that,
Yeah.
because yeah, because you might be trying to m- what is it, like confirm, yeah, like you might have this confirmation bias that, oh, I'm pretty sure that this is what it is. But I feel
Yeah.
like I kind of took the topic to sort of this meta
Yeah.
area here. Let's maybe go back to code. Does anything of what I said resonate with you?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, validating the bug, something I do very often just subconsciously, but it's also an important step. It's really nice that you mention it. Yeah. Ah, it's a very interesting topic. I'm really happy that we can discuss it and like share articles, workshops, like any knowledge, so people can actually get better at debugging. This is a really nice skill. Like I started using debugger itself probably like 2 years ago or something.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that it's bad if you're not using it, but it's good when you have more tools at your disposal. The more tools you have, the more problems you can solve.
Yeah.
And also, it kind of every tool teaches you that sometimes problems need different tools.
Yeah, I mean I haven't actually tried using debugger. I'm just learning about debugger, and that's mostly in the context of replay,
Yeah.
right? So I know that one of the problems of debugger is that you set up a breakpoint and then you stop the execution at that breakpoint, and but you're sort of guessing where the root cause is, so you can sort of step over one step at a time and try to find what the problem is. And apparently, if you step too far, you need to start the process again.
Hmm.
And one of the things that's with replay is that you actually have bi-directional debugger, so you can step forward and also step backward. Which when we were in Berlin and I did demos for people was something that everyone was like, oh, that's interesting. So maybe I need to learn more about the conventional debugger in order to appreciate the power of what we do at replay. I do appreciate it already, especially with like flaky tests. I think you mentioned something about tests, right? When sometimes you need to debug the test, right? Sometimes the test
Yeah.
is at fault. Sometimes it's the application. For me, when I was doing end-to-end testing, there were definitely cases where the test was written improperly, but more often I would find myself actually having problem with the application.
Mm.
A typical problem would be, all right, I have this input field and it has like a bunch of validation functions hooked into it, but since the test execution runs really fast, what ends up happening sometimes is that the for example Cypress script will find the input element and starts typing into it right as it appears. But then
Mm.
there's like a bunch of JavaScripts connected to those validations, and it makes the input field sort of re-render. And as a result, the text you're typing is not going to be typed in completely, right? I had an example recently. There was this word compressing, and instead it would just type pressing, because between the in between as the script was typing, it was actually re-rendered. So that's why you would only get the second half of the word.
Yeah,
And
those are tricky.
and I found that wait, where was I going with this? I totally forgot. Uh, but yeah, the tests can be flaky as well. The application under test can also be flaky as well. Um, and I think I had a different point, but I sort of forgot. I'm
It's okay.
rambling. um, yeah. All right. I have another thing. Unless you want to jump in.
I definitely would like to comment on like bidirectional debugger. That's a pretty nice feature to have. To me, one of the breaking points, what a pun, accidentally. For me, one of the breaking points when using debugger is that it's really handy when I know at least one surface where the problem is. So I can go down and I can find the problem. But sometimes I'm dealing with issues where I know what's the problem, but I don't know where that surface is, or I don't even control that surface. For example, I had a bug where something was adding an extra header to a request. Now I don't control that request. I actually don't know where it happens. So to me, there's nowhere to put the debugger statement. I can put it in my test, but then I will be like 100 levels above the actual problem surface. I will lose my sanity while I descend that hell of code. So what I ended up doing, I just kind of took the request prototype and I proxied or actually headers prototype, and I proxied the set method and I put a debugger there. So whenever any code in my test, mine or third party, calls headers.set, debugger would trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there would be a really cool feature that I actually considered building this like a library, kind of a reverse debugger, where you don't know, where you don't have access to where to put the debugger. This is something I would love to see from Replay. For example, like I know the problem is in the prototype of this class. Maybe I don't control it. So like give me this expression like class.prototype.blah, a check mark. It's gonna debug everything that happens to this class. That would be really cool.
I think I may be wrong about this, but we were talking about something similar, actually in connection to the example that I have talked about, the input, right, the lost input.
Mhm.
I was talking about, like, I would like to see everything that is happening to this input element at all time, and apparently that would require some sort of change in how we save things, and I believe that has been worked on at some point. So uh, again, like, this is a little bit too technical for me to be totally sure, but you should hop on our Discord channel and discuss this with Mark and Brian, and I'm pretty sure they will be able to tell you something about this. If it's not already possible, then maybe there's something close to that. Because honestly, I'm learning every day about Replay, and I'm just like impressed as I go. um, wait, what was the? Oh, it actually, as you talked about this, it also reminded me of one thing that I have done recently. An example of, I think a similar problem might be like routing issues when you have an application router, and there's like a lot of levels of abstraction when we are dealing with navigation and routing of the application, right? You have
Yeah.
a bunch of subpages. So I made an example. Let me actually share this with you.
Mhm.
Entire screen. Wait, which one is it? This one. Good. Share it with the audience. So I recently made an example of this. Here we have learn more, not resources. Learn more. And this is sort of a crazy example of what might happen into React app. It's exaggerated, right? We have this home path, and then we have a bunch of redirects. So page A redirects you to page B redirects you to page C redirects you to D, and then finally end up on D. So when you open the application, there's this button that you click on that redirects you to page A, and basically these 3 redirects happen instantaneously. You cannot even see them. If you click on back button, you can actually find them in a browser, but something like that might happen to you in probably not with redirects, but maybe change of protocol or change of hash or something in the path. Now, this again might be really hard to debug, because when things happen too fast, or when things are basically abstracted to some other layer, they might be really hard to find. But what's really nice about the browser API is that all of these abstractions, actually what they end up doing is called the window location property at some
Yeah,
point, right? And
yeah,
if that loaded in your browser, you actually have that available to you uh, in the runtime. So with Cypress, when you with Replay, when you record the whole runtime, you can just go ahead and search for window location, and then search for all of the node modules, which are by default they're excluded. But if your application uses packages, as usually a React app or whatever
yeah,
does, then you can find even within those. And here's an example of like, oh, here are actually some changes being done to window location. And if you add a print statement and print them out to see what exactly is changing, you can actually observe all of those route changes uh, over here. So you got the A, B, C, D, and everything.
yeah.
It reminded me of of the problem you have described because it sounded also like something that may be happening on a different layer. It's not exactly on the code you're controlling, but it is happening somewhere, either in a node module or on the network layer or somewhere where it's kind of hard to observe.
I wonder, would this work if the third-party code has a different syntax? For example, window is stored in a different variable. Now it's foo.location, or maybe location is accessed as a dynamic key. Now it's foo square brackets bar. Like this was my main problem with like request modification, header modification, because I don't know even the syntax that the library would use to do that. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it was really important to attach the debugger to a prototype because that would still be the underlying call.
Yeah. All right. All right. Oh, actually, let me share screen with you once more.
Yeah, go.
I
Actually, you're still sharing, so
Yeah, yeah. Here's the tweet from you. I think you made that yesterday. So
yeah, I
again,
see.
I'm sort of shifting topics here.
Yeah,
But you wrote about a pattern you don't like, and this struck me as really interesting. Is basically this one, right?
hmm
We do use the before all hook to initialize something, and then we use after all hook to destroy something. It kind of reminds me of the recommendation that I first heard from Gleb Bahmuto, who was an ex Cypress engineer, and
hmm
he would say, don't use after and after each to like clean up the state after the test. Actually, do everything before. Design your tests in a way so that you don't have to use after each and after all. I wonder, because when I looked at this, that was my first instinct that you're talking about this. But as I scrolled down, I realized that there's something more to it. Uh, but let's talk about test design, because you also wrote a blog post about the how to design tests, that you should prepare your test and act and assert,
yeah,
which is I like to call that the AAA pattern:
yes, yeah,
arrange, act, assert. And I like that
yeah,
very much, even for end-to-end tests. Um,
exactly.
so I would like you to shed more light on what this is, and why do you think that this is an anti-pattern?
Yeah. So what this is a testing setup pattern I saw a lot, and on itself, it's not immediately evil. It becomes evil once you have a very kind of living code base, the test base. And the problem here fundamentally is the mutable shared state. So something is a variable, a place in memory that, first of all, the whole test suite can access in this level. Like it's a root level variable. But the problem starts when you have this hooks like before all that modifies the value of that variable. So it basically rewrites it from undefined to something else. Not only is this problematic, especially if you're in a strong type environment like TypeScript, so suddenly something has to be X or undefined. This is nasty. It's never undefined, right? Because you have a runtime guarantee that before all will run before all tests, but TypeScript doesn't know that. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
either cheat TypeScript and force a strict type, although it is technically undefined. It's possible. The before all hook can fail. In fact, I've seen problems where the before all hook fails, And then we arrive to the after all cleanup, and then your test throws an exception, cannot read destroy of undefined. This is not a good test. This is something I truly despise. And the fundamental problem here is that, apologies. So the fundamental problem here is that something has to be assigned a value. Like you are creating something to then be the result of init. The only reason it's not assigned immediately is because the testing setup kind of has this designated hooks where you should uh, tear down, bootstrap and tear down your prerequisites, your whatever stuff you need to run the test. So what I favor very much is a similar pattern, but where the something is already assigned a value, kind of like a not a placeholder, but an instance. You can think about it like a class instance. Yeah, exactly in this example below. So we already create a constant that's never going to change. For example, responsible for spawning a server. This is what I use a lot. If you take a look at MSW tests, they all use a package called test server, and it has this create server function, and it creates a server, accepts a router function, configures all the behaviors, but doesn't start anything. So even at this level, it's immediately clear what this is for, what it does. And then I can start it wherever I want, actually. I can start it in a hook, I can start it in individual tests. It's really nice, it's clean, and it's never going to throw me undefined errors because it will always be defined. In fact, I can go into this create server and encapsulate more meaningful error messages. I can say if you call like destroy and a server wasn't started, just give a proper error message to the developer. Hey, you forgot to call server.listen. This is my main kind of point of grudge with using Express directly in tests when, for example, I want to spawn a test server, because that's precisely what happens to Express. You configure Express, and then you need to call a listen function and a way to promise. And I don't like this kind of disjoint nature. So I tend to wrap Express in something like this. And this is the pattern I use a lot.
Mm-hmm. What are some different patterns you see happening in the testing space, right? And that you either dislike or would advise against some sort of bad practices to call out?
Well, definitely any kind of shared state in a test is a bad practice.
Mm-hmm.
Your tests must be absolutely scoped and independent. So you should be able to run any test on its own and in any combination with other tests without any change to the result. It sounds like a very obvious rule, but still a lot of people break it. Not necessarily intentionally, just this happens. This is just one example of this kind of dependency. When you have some sort of global setup, suddenly your all tests depend on this one global. It may be fine, it may be not. It depends on the test orchestration. So what I recommend a lot is basically scoping the test setup to the test. And here is a really good pattern I can recommend, which is something people should embrace, is what Kenzie Dotes wrote about as well, called like avoid nesting when you're testing, which basically promotes flat test structure. Like I've been saying this, I think for a couple of years now. This has been one of the most impactful changes, like practical changes that improve my testing life a lot by a degree. Just forget about like this before all and after all hooks and try to embrace flat test structure. Like no describe statements, because I really like this philosophy, and how I interpret it is that if you need a lot of describe statements, it means you're testing a lot of different behaviors, or your behaviors are very variadic. And instead of kind of paying for this variability with, you know, decreased readability, you're nesting in your code, this kind of shared state, shared setup leaking between tests, it's much better to just split those tests into different test files. That's absolutely the same
Yeah.
outcome, but you don't have a bunch of problems related to having this weird nested structure. That's, first of all, to me, like huge proponent of readable code and readable tests. So it must be immediately clear.
Yeah.
Like I use this example a lot. I had a code base. I was debugging a failed test, and the problem was like 1,000 lines above the test. Like this is not okay. This is really not okay. And of course, it used describe. It was like fourth level of nesting a describe
Yeah.
block, asserting a sub behavior. You shouldn't spend time on that. Make your life easier. Everything you need for this test is within the test. And really, if it's easy to delete, that's a good test. Create
Yeah.
select a block, throw it away. That's a good test. It's gone.
I agree a lot. In fact, I sort of advise to like not use describe blocks at all, because
Yeah,
if you need one, then you don't need it, and if you need two, then it should be split.
it's too complex. Yeah, already. Yeah, exactly. And you know what's even awesome? Like my only reason where I still reach out for like after all hooks, at least, is to have the cleanup.
Hmm.
So this pattern that Ken proposed is really cool because you can, like, for example, spawn a test server as a part of a test. But then imagine if you have some assertions in the middle of a test and then they fail. So the execution for this particular test block will short circuit. And if you have a cleanup at the end, it will never run. So you have a loose server, potentially creating memory issues. But now we have a really cool using keyword coming to JavaScript. So you can actually use it to rely on JavaScript to garbage collect and dispose of a particular side effects like spawning on server. This basically is a cherry on top of this pattern, because now you can do like using server equals create server, and you don't even have to have a cleanup phase. The cleanup phase is already built in into the create server utility.
Hmm.
Like, I'm so looking forward to trying this. Haven't tried it myself yet, but it sounds amazing.
That's that's great. One of the things that also sort of I started thinking about in the background as you were talking about these different patterns and what we should be using and should not be doing in our test. I keep wondering about the dry principle.
Mhm.
I would love to hear your take on it because I do have an opinion on it, but I would first like to hear yours.
Okay. So, like, in general, about the principle,
Hmm.
I
In
think that,
general, but in context of testing.
of course, of course. So, my opinion on this is that sometimes people definitely follow this rule too hard. And I don't believe that any repetition is a reason for reusage. Or even, let me put it better, not every repetition is the reason for abstraction. And in fact, I think the brilliant post or a talk by Dan Abramov about, I don't recall the name, but the whole point was that don't abstract too early. And he gives examples in React code base, how they did abstractions too early. It didn't work out. It results in a bloated abstraction that does 10,000 things. This is a very good point. So you shouldn't really be hasty to abstract. In fact, I would most definitely recommend people to repeat stuff. Somehow our, like, human brain thinks that repetition is bad. Like, if I can reuse, if I can, like, I would be more efficient, I would be more clever. But that's the thing, especially in tests, you shouldn't be clever in tests. The test should be straightforward. So if you need to repeat some logic, just repeat it across 10 tests. Like, what is the price of that? That it repeats? Well, that's okay. If it repeats, it's fine. What if there's different behavior in this test and all the other 9 are completely different? Suddenly it's good that it repeats, because you can just change it in one place and don't have this kind of dependency, because you not always know the blast radius of any change to any abstraction. So if you can
Yeah.
minimize it, that's pretty cool. You have a more manageable abstraction. But at the same time, of course, there are use cases where you do need to abstract. So I'm not like proposing just to repeat everything, but more of a repeat as a first step, until you really have the time and knowledge, for example, of a test base, that certain actions really are the same. For example, let's say you're like filling the form on like every test. So maybe you do need a function that just accepts a form reference and fields and just fills them in. Why not, right? So it's up to you to design this kind of abstract language around your tests, and it's fine if you abstract there and don't repeat yourself, for sure. I am always cautious and advise people against any kind of abstractions in expectations, so in assertions. So when you check for things to happen, try for those expect blocks to be as clear as possible. So no for loops, nothing crazy. Your mind should be able to parse those lines immediately and understand them. That's like the most important part of the test. If you need some logic, abstract it away. Do that crazy for loop away, assign it to a variable, assert on that variable like statically. Just this variable equals this. Very easy to reason about.
Yeah, I you posed a very good question. Like, what's the price of that? What's the price of doing an abstraction and making uh, essentially sometimes creating obscurities in your
Yeah.
tests? And I would say like in the price of repetition, right? And I would say that, and this is the point I'm making a lot during my live streams or whenever I talk to anyone about testing, is that tests should be readable. Like that's like almost number one rule, to make it
Mhm.
as readable as possible, and that includes, yeah, sometimes repeating yourself, and uh, and the reason why you want to make your tests readable is that if they fail, you need to be able to tell why they failed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you do bunch of levels of abstractions, and I've seen this, and I've criticized the page object pattern a lot, all right, because that's sort of a pattern you start with on day one, and that's the definition of like abstracting too early. And oftentimes you would like if you need to debug a single test, you need to open like 4 or 5 different files because everything is abstracted to its own chunk, so you don't repeat yourself. And it actually ignores. It's actually not even dry. It's dry in code, right? You don't repeat yourself in the code, but you do end up repeating yourself a lot within like the execution, right? A typical example of that would be if your application is behind authentication, right? If you need to log in. So most of the times you need to do login for each and every test, right? And that's an example of repeating yourself in the in the in the execution, because you can actually with tools we have today, especially Cypress and Playwright, you can cache the
session,
browser state, the session, right? So instead, do that, and you're going to do login just once and then like not repeat it forever. And I think that's sort of omitted when we are talking about the try principle, because as testers, we need to think about how our code is executed. We often like scrutinize quite a lot about like how long is the test execution, etc. And there's no harm in that. That's actually really good. But sometimes I feel like we might be forgetting part of that, and writing this really like abstract codes, but not really hitting the mark with the execution.
Yeah, and like if you take a look at this example of like session, it really just shows you the like insufficient testing setup. This is once again why I always say that testing setup is the most important part, where it's constantly underloved. You should pay more attention to it. Like here, when you can imagine like a test having an action to actually log in, well, you need to keep in mind the actions you perform in a test should be from the user's perspective. So if it is a test that should actually validate the user is able to log in, that's fine. But let's imagine you have a test where a logged in user is a given. That's what people miss a lot. If it's a given, it needs to be part of the setup. So use, Playwright, Cypress ability to store the session in JSON and just hydrate from it. That's the setup kind of, that's something that's not changeable. It's a constant in this test. And then the actions is what actually the logged in user already performs. So yeah, brilliant example. I may even steal it if I have to like
Yeah,
showcase this mistake. Yeah, don't put setup into actions. Like setup is a setup phase, actions are actions, and then you have assertions.
yeah. Feel free. Honestly, if when you go to that debugging workshop and you need to bounce off ideas of me, I would love to
Thank you.
collaborate on
Thank
that
you so much.
with any examples or whatever. That would be really cool, because it is a topic that's close to my heart, and it's close to my heart because I've for a couple of years I've been writing blog posts about testing, mostly about Cypress and how to use the tool and how to solve different problems. And then I would go back to my work and my tests would be failing left and right. And I felt a little bit almost like dishonest, right? Because I'm teaching these best practices, and then in real life, how can my test fail when I teach people how to write them? Am I teaching them wrong? Is there something wrong with what I'm saying? And it's the answer is no. Like the failing tests and debugging and trying to figure out what's going on, it's actually part of the journey. But as we already established, it's something that doesn't get discussed as much as it should. So anytime you want to talk debugging, I'm all for it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, I actually don't know where to take it from here. So
I have a few points.
yeah,
So,
okay, let's go, because I thought we might actually even wrap it up, but let's keep the conversation going. So don't leave, everyone. Who's here? Are we alone? We're probably not. that's okay.
So I have a question that I'm really curious about. So I've been spending a lot of time in Node.js over the years, like dealing with interceptors and all these things. And I'm constantly, basically, I have a tab in Chrome that has Node.js source open all the time, 24/7. So I'm jumping between different like random modules just to understand what Node.js does. Because very often I create an interceptor, well, it intercepts requests, but then it just hangs. This is a good indicator that I'm kind of preventing Node from doing what Node's supposed to do. This isn't what I want to do because obviously I don't want to disrupt the flow. I don't want to have those requests pending. So I go into the source code and I'm trying to, run a mental debugger,
Mhm.
like just in my head, just going through every line. My big question, this can win me into replay like instantly. Can I tap into Node.js source? So I have a, I don't know, an error in some socket. Can I descend into the Node.js actually, like to go to the like socket prototype, find the emit method, and see that in this test case, emit actually doesn't receive a chunk or something? Oh, this is a bug. Can I do this?
uh, I think the answer ultimately would be yes. Uh, I couldn't give you an example right now, or like a working repo with this or something.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
fine.
as far as my understanding goes of what replay does, for example, in browser, what we record is the interaction between browser and the operation system. And
Mhm.
the experimental support for Node.js, I believe, it uses the same principle, the same protocol, and records everything that happens between an entity and the operation system. So I would assume that the experimental support for the Node.js is exactly this. And I think
Mm.
maybe Matush might actually have the answer for that. And again, I invite you to join the Discord
Yes.
and open the discussion there, um, because my technical knowledge doesn't go as far. But the things I have already learned about the replay protocol, which actually like drives the recording capabilities of our Chrome browser, um, I believe it could capture that as well. So I'm pretty positive the answer to your question is yes. But yeah, ask my incredibly smart colleagues in the team.
That
They'll probably have a much more solid answer for you.
that's fascinating. Even this answer is already enough to get my hopes high because I'm a little tired of this kind of manual debugging. I want a bit more of automation, especially when we diving very deep into Node.js source.
Yeah,
It takes time that it shouldn't take, and I wish I had a lot of knowledge over the code base, but I'm not, and I have to figure out it by myself, and it gets very tedious very fast. So yeah, excited to give
yeah.
it a try. I remember I talked with Mark, I believe,
Hmm.
like some time ago about the Node.js support. It was experimental, so it's really interesting to see it working. So you have at least one serious user here. So
Yeah.
yes, Node.js
Uh,
support,
I
please.
guess I guess after this call, I need to open the docs and take a look into into that example and try it out for myself. And I
Feel
would
free to
probably
send it
be
to me.
able to give you the answer.
Yeah,
Uh, wait, you know what? I actually might find it. Uh, um, experimental. Where are we? Yeah, replay note experimental. I'm sending that to you right now. I'm actually going to send it to the chat as well to anyone who might be interested in this.
I think it
Um,
gives me 404. Maybe something wasn't copied right.
oh,
Uh,
gives you
maybe
404.
it's. Um,
That's weird.
it looks like the link is incomplete. It ends with experimental.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't know. You know what? You'll find it in the reference guide
yeah,
under recording. Maybe the brackets um, don't work here.
yeah.
I
That's probably the
believe.
case.
You know what? I'm going to send it to you through Twitter because
Let's do it.
this tool that we are using is maybe doing some
Perhaps something else on, yeah.
weird stuff with the link. It has brackets, so
Yeah.
maybe it's thrown off by this.
Okay, yeah, now I see it. I would love to know the nitty-gritty of this, because I imagine you have to have a node binary precompiled to have the replay protocol there, which is kind of similar what you do with browsers, right? I remember Replay actually has their own browser
Yeah.
based on Chromium. Yeah, so I imagine Node.js must work similarly. You have to have access to the internals. That is so nice.
Yeah. So like the simplest principle of how I would draw what replay is that it is we have two main parts of the replay experience. One is the replay browser that has the recording capabilities. So anything you run in that browser gets recorded at a runtime level. So if there's a function that you call inside your application, you're going to see everything that was passed into the function, everything that it has returned. If you have asynchronous function, you can actually see the order in which they were executed and in which order they gave you the output, right? And then we have the DevTools, because the browser creates that recording and DevTools actually help you look into that recording. And it's pretty much like the Chrome DevTools you are used to, right? You have your Elements panel, Network panel, Console, whatever. But then there's the crucial element of that is the timeline that you can move throughout your execution, whether that was a test execution of a Cypress Playwright or Selenium test or WebDriver, whatever framework you are using for browser testing, and or it's a manual recording where you just hit the record button and you record it, whatever happened in the browser. And it's also has like a very good support for React, right? So if you have like React components and props, as you move throughout the timeline, you can see the React props changing and stuff like that. So you get really, really good insight. And if things happen too fast or hard to reproduce or whatever, if you record it once, you're good to go. You already have it. If I record something on a Mac and you're on Windows, you'll be able to see what happened on my Mac. If you're run it on CI, you'll be able to see what's happening on CI. So the collaboration aspect there is also like really, really powerful. But I think that the biggest power is the ability to like stop the recording at a perfect moment at the line that you are interested in. You can print out stuff. So normally if you put console logs to see what's happening, you can do that in the recording. So you have the recording, add the console log after. It's kind of it's kind of magic. For me, the biggest selling point was like, all right, I'm running a bunch of end-to-end tests. They're failing for me. I'm failing to teach everyone properly how to write Cypress tests. But it's actually hard, right? Because you have the application, that's the whole system, right? And you have the test, that's another whole system. So you connect these two systems to interact together, and what you will get is the integration hell, right? where something asynchronous happens, some click happens too early or too late, or something like that, and you're just out there trying to figure out what's happening. If you have that recorded, just once you can find out what's happened. I recently wrote a blog post about how we were helping Metabase. I actually wrote 3 different use cases, and most of them were like, oh, there was a 2-pixel difference, and it made the test click on the wrong thing, right? Good luck replicating that or finding that kind of a problem. So that's what fascinates me about replay. So I see that bringing this to Node is going to be game changing. I'll make sure to loop that back to the team. Not sure if that's the priority numero uno right now.
Of course, that's
eventually. eventually it will be there. I mean, we're just starting. This thing is freaking amazing.
Oh yeah.
It's impressing me every day.
Uh,
All right. Uh, that was the only question you had. I felt like you had like a bunch of topics you wanted to to discuss.
I think this was the main question because it's constantly on my mind right now.
Okay.
I'm still working on that pull request. We have to figure out the compatibility with TLS socket, which it's very hard for me to understand what it even does. I feel like Node.js is like basically split between the C code and JavaScript code, and then not everything is possible to figure out, at least for me. So having a debugger would be really cool. What I want to do is like construct a regular TLS connection, like no mocks, and I want to record that request from start to finish. And what I would love to see is basically everything that happened to that socket instance, all the events it emitted, all the properties it changed. This would be godlike. Like
Mm-hmm.
honestly, this would make my work so simple. It's not even debugging. It's kind of, especially like it's exactly how we framed it at the beginning of the stream. It's not even debugging. I want this to learn. So for me, this would be a learning tool. Like I want to learn what
Yeah.
Node does in this instance, and that's the best way for me to learn, just to see every step. Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that's something I recognize as well. That having this amount of insight, it actually opens up learnings that were not actually reachable, approachable,
Yeah,
because like the classic example of like two asynchronous functions, right? They just execute, and in whatever order they finish, they will finish, right?
yeah,
In real life, just like manually replicating stuff or whatever, you're pretty much unable to find to learn about them, right? And also when it comes to like mixing synchronous and asynchronous functions, right? That's the that's a source of so many bugs. But if you have a recording that
yeah,
is like a split millisecond precision, you can take a look at the state before and after uh, a split millisecond, and I think that's really cool.
yeah.
Uh,
That makes a full difference.
I have a final thing I want to run by you.
Of course, go ahead.
I have a tweet here
Hmm.
that's coming from you.
A
Uh,
lot of people quote me on my tweets, and it's still surprising to me that somebody reads me.
yeah, you have a decent following, so
Very
I think
grateful.
that makes sense. Uh, yeah, let's finish on a positive note. So you mentioned today video games are art. They have significantly contributed to who you are today. Taught you how to try, fail, retry, be persistent. I think that's spot on. I love this aspect of games, especially when you are on like a hard level and you
Oh yeah,
spend days and days trying to beat the boss or whatever.
yeah.
We all been there. Uh, what's your favorite game?
Hmm. Favorite game.
In you can narrow it down to like recent
Okay.
past.
Okay. Recent favorite games. Hmm. I really enjoyed Elden Ring
Hmm.
for a bunch of reasons. And my like last recent favorite would be Cyberpunk 2077 because I haven't played it on release and I never play games on release for various reasons. So I finally got to play it and it was amazing. Like it was experience I still miss over evenings. Like, oh, I wish I had something else to do there. And like I'm just done with this. But probably like all-time favorites, I would definitely put Bioshock series somewhere at the top.
Hmm.
It's incredibly well done and written, and I recommend it to everybody. Dark Souls teach you about perseverance and the cost of failure and how to press on. This is incredible. I love Dark Souls. I love them for their subtle lore. It's phenomenal. Um, what else? It's usually some impactful games, either gameplay wise or story wise.
Hmm.
So you can have games like God of War, talking about newest editions because I haven't played the old ones, where they focuses on the story and the story is deeply moving and compelling, and I enjoy it a lot. Maybe it's not like gameplay wonder like to me Dark Souls is,
Mhm.
the story side there prevails, and it's really cool. Um, yeah, that's probably somewhere along those lines. Yeah,
Really nice. I played games when I was young. It was mostly like NHL, FIFA, stuff like that. But I also enjoyed Mafia
mm,
and those games. I only recently bought a PC that I could play games on, because
nice.
my son is now 8 years old. He told me he wants to be a game developer. We're going to be creating a game together, but I also like wanted to come back to that. So I have that PC. I have not played almost at all, but I have downloaded a bunch of games, and I'm really excited that you mentioned some of them that I have downloaded because I hear they're popular. So I haven't played Elden Ring and Cyberpunk, but I do have them
Mm,
downloaded.
yeah.
I'm currently playing Red Dead Redemption.
Ooh, it's very
That's a
good. I
lot of
heard.
fun. Yeah, that's I end up laughing at how good it is because it just surprised me. I mean, we come a long way since Mafia.
Oh yeah.
I don't have a lot of time, but to play. But when I do, I'm really enjoying those. Those are fun. So it's another push for me to try Elden Ring because I hear it's at the very top. I'm also kind of afraid if I play the top game, like, will anything be fun afterwards? So maybe sort of saving
It
that for
will.
last.
It will. There's Elden Ring is very special. I would my personal opinion about it is a phenomenal game. I would not play again. And I
Okay.
will not explain why. If you're interested, ask me on Twitter.
Some of the games are like that. You just play them once, and it's okay. I actually like
Yes,
that.
yes.
Like, I also really enjoy the storytelling aspect of games. If there's a good story that lives with me, it's almost like seeing a good movie or reading a
Yeah.
great book. I'm really happy that there's a lot of effort put into the stories of games. In fact, Elden Ring, I believe George R. Martin helped with some of the stuff. I believe
Mhm.
like the world building aspect of it
Yeah.
was done by him. So if big names are called into creation of this, it's always interesting to see. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh yeah. I think you will enjoy it.
All right. Well, I don't know what to jump into, whether it is the experimental node or the Elden Ring now.
I think both will be equal complexity, but in Node you cannot summon people to help you. Or maybe you can. Hmm.
I have a lot of very smart colleagues, so I'll probably be able to summon someone.
You see.
All right, Artem. This has been amazing. I expect it to be amazing. It was amazing. Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for coming on this live stream, for geeking about testing, sharing your knowledge. Uh,
Yeah.
it's been a pleasure.
It's been, thank you so much for having me. Just one last thing I would have to mention at the end of the stream. There is an Epic Web Conf happening next month, I believe the 12th of April. So if you head to epicweb.dev, you should be able to grab your tickets. I will be speaking there about something very exciting in the future of MSW, and you will be able to meet a lot of other people apart from me there and have a chat. So if you haven't bought a ticket, go and buy it.
All right. Also, make sure to follow Artem on social media. I believe on Twitter is where you are most active.
Yeah,
Uh, and yeah, go ahead and buy the ticket to the conference. It will be exciting. I saw the lineup. It's full of amazing names, you included.
it's
That's
it's
great.
epic.
All right, then. So, bye everyone who's watching us live or who's watching this afterwards. This is the end. Thank you so much for sticking with us, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. See ya.
All right, I believe we should be offline now, so no one could hear us. Wait, maybe they can hear us. Let me check.